The dust in Trinity Wells had a taste. It was a mix of lye soap, horse manure, and the fine, gritty powder of 8 months without rain. Lottie knew the taste better than any bread. She tasted it now, thick on her tongue, mingling with the iron tang of blood from her split lip. It was Jedediah Sykes and his boys, mostly hands from the Circle C ranch, who had decided on the joke. They were drunk, which was usual for a Tuesday afternoon. But this time the meanness had a sharper edge. They had been drinking at the Silver Spur Saloon since noon, tossing coins on the warped pine bar, their eyes landing on Lottie where she sat quiet in the corner, trying to mend a tear in her thin shawl. She was not worth much anymore, not even to Swain, the saloon owner. She was pale and thin, with a cough that rattled her ribs, and the men preferred the newer girls shipped in from Austin. Lottie was used goods, and in 1873, Texas had no use for anything that was broken. Look at her. Jed had slurred, pointing a grimy finger. Looks half dead already. Bet the Comanches wouldn't even take her. A roar of laughter. Pike, a young hand with mean eyes, slammed his glass down. Let's find out. Let's make her a present for old Chief Parker. They moved fast. Swain, the owner, just polished a glass and looked the other way when they grabbed her. Lottie was too weak from hunger to fight much. She gave a small cry, but it was lost in the noise. They dragged her from the stool, her mending falling to the floor. They hauled her out of the swinging doors and into the blinding white sunlight of the main street. The town watched. From behind the curtained window of the Mercantile, Mrs. Gable pursed her lips and turned away. 2 blacksmiths stopped their hammering, leaned on their anvils, and just stared. A group of children, playing marbles in the dirt, pointed and giggled. This was entertainment. Jed and Pike pulled her down the street, her worn boots scraping furrows in the dust. They had a length of hemp rope. They were heading for the edge of town, toward the low, broken hills that marked the beginning of Comanche territory. Everyone knew not to ride out there alone. They stopped at the last marker of Trinity Wells, an old, weathered wagon post, sunk deep in the ground, where freighters used to tie off. It was maybe 200 yards past the sheriff's office. This'll do. Jed grinned, showing the gaps in his teeth. They were rough. The rope bit into her wrists, scraping the skin raw as they cinched her tight to the wood. She tried to plead, but her voice was a dry croak. "Please, Jed, don't. It's cold." "It'll get colder. Lottie," Pike sneered, checking the knot. "You should have been nicer to me last week. I had $2. $2, she remembered. He had been drunk then, too, and wanted things she had refused. This, then, was her payment. Sheriff Brody stepped out onto the boardwalk of his office. He was a large man with a stained vest, chewing on a plug of tobacco. He watched the men secure the last knot. "Sheriff!" Lottie cried out, a threat of real panic in her voice. "Sheriff, make them stop!" Brody watched for a long moment. He spat a long, brown stream into the dust. "They ain't breaking no law inside the town line. Lottie," he called back, his voice flat. "That post is county land, and what you do with the ranchers is your own business." He turned, adjusted his gun belt, and walked back inside his office. The door clicked shut. A silence fell. The laughter of the men was the only sound. Jed slapped the post, right next to Lottie's head, making her flinch. "Have a nice evening, darlin'," he said. "Send our regards to the savages." The group of 6 men mounted their horses. They tipped their hats in mock courtesy, wheeled their animals around, and rode back toward the lights of the Silver Spur, whooping and firing a few shots into the air. And then they were gone. Lottie was left alone, tied to the post. The sun was a low, angry red smear in the west, and the wind was picking up. The townsfolk who had been watching drifted away, back to their suppers and their chores. No one looked back. No one helped. They left her, as if she were a bag of refuse, tied up for the coyotes. Night did not fall gently. It fell like a hammer. The last warmth of the day vanished, sucked out of the air by a wind that came screaming down from the north. It was a blue norther, the kind that could kill a herd of cattle overnight. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Lottie's thin dress, the one she had mended, was useless. The cold found every bare patch of skin, every thin spot in the fabric. It slid under her clothes like icy water, making her gasp. The shivering started soon after. It was not a gentle trembling, but a violent, racking shudder that shook her whole body, rattling her teeth until her jaw ached. The post, her anchor, was now a thing of ice. The cold wood leached the heat from her back. Her wrists, tied tight, went from burning pain to a dull, throbbing ache, and then, terrifyingly, to numbness. She pulled, but the rope was stiff with frost and held fast. The coyotes began a high, yipping call from the east, answered by a long, mournful howl from the west. They were close. They sounded like they were laughing, just like Jed and Pike. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, trying to shrink into herself. The storm set in. It was not rain, but a hard, stinging sleet that turned quickly to snow. The flakes were small and dense, driven by the wind, coating her hair and shoulders in a layer of white. The world dissolved into a howling gray vortex. She was so cold, so hungry. She had not eaten anything but a stale biscuit that morning. The hunger and the cold began to warp her mind. The wind was no longer just a sound. It was a voice, whispering the names of all the men who had passed her around. Her past rose up to meet her in the snow. She was 14 again, in a muddy St. Louis boarding house. She saw her aunt's hard face, her hand outstretched. "She's a good girl, Mr." her aunt was saying. "Strong, worth at least $40. She was on a flatboat, drifting down the Mississippi. The men were playing cards on a barrelhead. She was the pot. The winner, a man with a beard stained yellow with tobacco, had dragged her into the dark. She was in Kansas, in a sod house, serving whiskey to buffalo hunters. They smelled of grease and gunpowder. They called her Lottie, though her name was Charlotte. They said it was a friendlier name, a quicker name. She was here, in Trinity Wells. She saw Jed's face, and Pike's, and Sheriff Brody's. She saw the faces of men who had paid their quarter for a dance, their dollar for the room upstairs. Men who had called her pretty in the dark and ignored her in the daylight. Men who had paid for her, used her, and now discarded her. She was lesser. She had always been lesser. She was a thing to be used and thrown away. The wind told her so. The coyotes agreed. A strange warmth began to spread through her limbs. The shivering eased. She knew, vaguely, that this was a bad sign. She had seen a cowboy, caught in a blizzard, found 2 days later. He had looked peaceful, they said, almost smiling. Lottie let her head droop. The snow piled up around her boots, climbed her legs. It felt like a blanket. It was almost soft. She closed her eyes. Sato did not like the storm. He was tracking a small band of antelope, but the blue norther had driven them south, and his pony was tired. He pulled his buffalo robe tighter. He was far from his band's winter camp, farther than the elders liked him to go, but he was restless. He had seen the riders earlier, 6 of them, galloping away from the white man's town, drunk, firing their pistols at the sky. He had hidden in a dry arroyo, his rifle ready, until they passed. White men were always trouble, but drunk white men were a plague. They shot at anything that moved, or anything that did not. He had lost his younger brother to such men. Soldiers, they were, not ranchers, but they all had the same smell. Whiskey and iron and a hatred for the land. He was circling back toward the canyons, keeping his eyes on the ground, when he saw the post. It was an ugly thing, a scar on the plains. He guided his pony closer, wary. It could be a trap. The Texans were clever in their cruelty. At first, he thought it was a strange drift of snow, piled high against the wood. Then the wind shifted. and he saw a flicker of dark cloth. He dismounted, his rifle in his hand. He moved low and silent, the snow crunching under his moccasins. He circled the post. It was a woman, a white woman. His first instinct was to turn, to leave. This was a white person's problem. They did this to each other. He had seen it before. They were a people who ate their own. Whatever had happened here, it was not his concern. He owed her nothing. He owed her kind only suspicion. He nudged the drift with his foot. The body was limp, probably frozen. He almost turned away. But then she moved. A small sound, a breath of air, escaped her blue lips. Her head lifted, just an inch from her chest. Her eyes opened. They were pale, the color of the sky before the storm, and they were empty, utterly empty. There was no fear in them, no fight, no pleading, just a vast, frozen stillness. He had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of a wolf caught in a steel trap, waiting for the trapper to return. He had seen it in the eyes of his own cousins, huddled on the reservation lands, staring at the ground. It was the look of a thing that had accepted its own death. That look held him. It cut through his anger, through his mistrust. It was a shared language. He did not see a white woman. He saw a discarded soul. He slung his rifle over his back and pulled his knife. She flinched when she saw the blade, a tiny spark of fear finally appearing. "Be still," he said. The words were low. Comanche. She would not understand them. But the tone was steady. He did not cut her loose. He cut the ropes. They were frozen solid, like wood. He had to saw at them, the hemp fibers screaming in the cold. Her hands were bound in front of her. When the last strand snapped, she did not move. She was frozen to the post. He had to pull her free, gently, breaking the ice that had sealed her dress to the wood. She was light, frighteningly light, like a bundle of dry sticks. She collapsed into the snow, unconscious again. He worked quickly. He could not leave her. He did not know why. But he could not. He untied his robe from his shoulders, the wind hitting his own tunic instantly, stealing his warmth. He wrapped her in the heavy fur, lifting her as if she were a child. Getting her onto his pony was difficult. She was a dead weight. He managed to heave her across the pony's withers, then mounted behind her, pulling her upright against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her in place. She was so cold, even through the thick buffalo hide. She felt like a block of ice. He urged the pony forward, into the teeth of the wind, away from the faint, hateful lights of Trinity Wells. The journey was brutal. The landscape was a frozen hell, a maze of sharp-edged canyons and snow-laced cliffs. The wind howled through the narrow passes, trying to tear them from the horse. Sato kept his head down, his eyes scanning the terrain. Wolf tracks were everywhere, fresh in the new snow. They were hunting, too. He held the woman tight, several times. She groaned, a low, feverish sound. He could feel the terrible, weak shuddering of her body, even through the fur. He pushed the pony on, descending deeper into the sheltered lands, toward the place his people called the winter home. It was hours later, long after midnight, when they arrived. The camp was hidden, tucked into a deep fold of the canyon, protected from the wind by sheer walls of red rock. Smoke rose from the hide lodges, smelling of juniper and roasting meat. Dogs barked at his approach, and figures emerged from the lodges, wrapped in blankets. They saw him, and they saw the bundle he carried. He dismounted, lifting the woman into his arms. He was stiff with cold, his own body shaking. An elder, stands tall, approached him. The old man's face was a map of deep lines, his eyes sharp and wary. He looked at the white woman in Sato's arms, her pale hair matted with snow and blood. The elder spoke, his voice a low rumble. "You bring a white—" It was not a question. "She was left," Sato said, "tied to a post. The storm would have taken her." "The storm should have taken her," Stands Tall replied, his voice hard. "You know what they bring. They bring soldiers. They bring sickness. They bring death." He touched a puckered white scar on his own cheek. "Their breath is poison. This one has no breath left to poison anyone," Sato said. He was too tired to argue, too cold. He pushed past the elder and carried Lottie to his own lodge, the smallest one, set slightly apart from the others. The tribe watched him go. Their faces were not welcoming. They were suspicious, and they were afraid. Inside, it was dark, but warmer. A bed of furs lay against the far wall. Sato laid her down gently. He built up the small fire in the center, the flames catching on the dry wood, casting flickering shadows on the hide walls. He unwrapped her from his robe. Her clothes were frozen. He had to use his knife again, carefully, to cut the rigid fabric away from her skin. Her body was a geography of old bruises and new frostbite. Her wrists were raw, bloody pulp. He found his medicine bundle. He took dried herbs, yarrow and willow bark, and crushed them. He found a clean piece of soft doe skin and made a poultice, gently cleaning her wounds and wrapping them. He covered her in his thickest sleeping furs. He brought snow in a small pot and melted it over the fire, forcing a few sips of water between her cracked lips. Then he sat back on his heels, watching her. He had done what he could. The rest was up to the spirits. He kept the fire fed, listening to the storm rage outside and the woman's shallow, rattling breath inside. Lottie woke to pain. Her body was on fire, yet she was shivering. She was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. She was buried in something incredibly soft and heavy. Furs. Her mind was a fog. The post, the cold, the laughing. She opened her eyes. The light was dim, golden, and pulsing. A fire. She was in a small, round room. The walls were not wood. They were skins, stretched tight. The air smelled strange, like smoke and herbs and something musky. She tried to sit up, and a sharp pain shot through her body. She cried out. She looked down. She was covered in furs. Beneath them, she was wearing a simple, loose shirt of soft leather. It was not hers. Her wrists were bandaged with hide. A dark, pungent paste was spread over the rope burns. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her system. She was not in Trinity Wells. The wind, the snow, had they found her? The men? No, this was not a ranch house. This was a lodge. A tipi. She was in a Comanche camp. The stories she had heard in the saloon, tales told by freighters and soldiers, crashed into her mind. They were savages. They killed men and tortured women. She had been saved from the cold only to be taken. She was a captive. It was the same story, just a different master. She had to run. She threw the furs off, her body screaming in protest. The cold air of the lodge hit her. She tried to stand. Her legs were water. They would not hold her. She fell to her knees on the hard-packed dirt floor, gasping. She crawled toward the opening, a flap of hide. She had to get out. She had to hide. She reached the flap and pushed it open an inch. A wall of white. Swirling snow and wind met her, and a figure. A man was standing just outside the doorway, as if he had been there all along. He was tall, wrapped in a blanket, his black hair braided. He was just watching her. Lottie screamed, a thin, hoarse sound, and scrambled backward, collapsing near the fire. She huddled, pulling her knees to her chest, shaking, not from the cold, but from pure terror. Sato watched her from the doorway, his face still unreadable. He had seen the panic in her eyes. He had expected it. He did not move toward her. He did not touch her. He stood there for a long moment, letting her see that he was not going to strike. Then he turned. He picked up a small wooden bowl from the snow outside. It was filled with a thin, warm broth. He crouched, placing the bowl on the ground, just inside the lodge. far enough away from her that she would have to move to get it, but close enough that she could see it. He looked at her one last time. She was pressed against the far wall, her eyes wide with terror, like a cornered rabbit. He stood up, turned his back to her, and walked away into the swirling snow, leaving her alone with the fire and the food. For 3 days, Lottie did not speak. She existed in a fog of fever and fear. Huddled in the nest of furs, the world was reduced to the 4 elements of the lodge: the fire, the cold hide walls, the man, and the broth. He came and went with the silence of a shadow. He would enter, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, and she would flinch, pressing herself against the curved wall, her heart a cold stone in her chest. He would place a steaming bowl of broth near the fire and retreat, sitting on his own sleeping furs on the opposite side of the small lodge. He never watched her eat. He would busy himself, mending a snowshoe with strips of rawhide or sharpening his knife with a smooth river stone. The sound of the blade scraping the stone set her teeth on edge. She drank the broth because her body screamed for it. It was thin but hot, and it tasted of meat and strange, bitter herbs. Each sip was a surrender. She was being kept fattened. She knew this pattern. She had seen it at the saloon, when Swain would give a new girl extra meals for the first week, before the work began. She was being claimed again, this time by a savage. The men in Trinity Wells had thrown her away, and this one had picked her up. The humiliation of it was a physical ache, as sharp as the frostbite. Her memories were relentless. They came in the smoke, in the long silences. Jed's laugh, the sheriff's flat, empty voice, the cold. She would wrap her arms around her chest, her newly bandaged wrists crossed, and rock silently, her eyes fixed on the fire. The man, Tsato, spoke little. When he did, it was in his own tongue, low words to himself as he worked. He never spoke to her, but his actions were plain. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She woke in a pool of sweat, her mind clear for the first time. The lodge was empty. The fire was banked, glowing softly. He had left her. She scrambled to her feet, her legs weak and trembling. She had to get away. She stumbled to the lodge flap and pushed it aside. The cold hit her like a fist. She stepped out and sank to her knees in deep snow. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The canyon was vast, surrounded by towering red cliffs dusted with powder. Other lodges, 10 or 12 of them, were scattered across the canyon floor, smoke rising from their peaks. A group of children, bundled in furs, stopped their game of throwing sticks. They stared. Their faces were round, their eyes black and curious. A woman emerged from a larger lodge, carrying a bundle of firewood. She saw Lottie and stopped. Her face hardened. She spat on the snow, near Lottie's feet, and muttered something sharp. Lottie felt the old, familiar shame wash over her. It was the same look Mrs. Gable gave her at the mercantile, the look of a decent woman at a soiled one. She crawled back into the lodge, her cheeks burning, and pulled the flap shut. He returned an hour later. He carried a fresh piece of venison. He did not look at her as he entered. He just nodded toward the open flap, which she had not secured. He pointed at her, then pointed at the opening, and then made a walking gesture with his fingers, moving them away from the lodge. He was telling her she could go. She stared at him, uncomprehending. He repeated the gesture. She was free to leave. Lottie looked down at her feet, still raw and swollen, wrapped in soft hide. She looked at the wall of white outside. Free to leave? Free to walk into that wilderness and die? It was the same joke the ranchers had played, just quieter. She shook her head, pulling the furs tighter. He grunted, as if he had expected this, and set about building up the fire. The tribe did not want her. In the days that followed, as she regained her strength, she felt their suspicion like a physical barrier. When she ventured out to use the latrine trench, the women would stop their work, scraping hides or grinding corn, and watch her. Their faces were closed, their eyes hard. One young woman, with bright beads in her hair, was relentless. She would follow Lottie, mimicking her weak, shuffling walk. She pointed at Lottie's pale, chapped skin and laughed. A high, sharp sound that made Lottie's spine stiffen. The children, braver now, would run close, calling her ghost face in their tongue, then scatter like birds when Sato emerged from his lodge. Lottie retreated. She was used to being hated. This was no different. The pain of it was duller now, a familiar ache, like an old break in a bone that hurt when the weather turned. She stayed inside the lodge, where the silence was at least clean. She and Sato lived in that silence for days. They shared the small space, two animals in one den, wary and watchful. He would leave at dawn to hunt or check traps, and return at dusk. She would spend the day sleeping, or rubbing her healing wrists, or simply staring into the fire, trying not to remember. In this quiet, they began to observe one another. He was chopping firewood one afternoon, just inside the lodge to escape a new, biting wind. He had taken off his thick buffalo robe and worked in just his leather tunic. He turned his back to her to reach for a larger piece of wood. The firelight caught the skin of his back where the tunic had ridden up. Lottie gasped. His back was a ruin of scar tissue. It was not the neat, parallel lines of a white man's bullwhip. This was different. Jagged, puckered scars, one of which formed a perfect, ugly circle on his left shoulder blade, the mark of a branding iron, and lower, near his ribs, a deep, wide scar, as if a spear had been torn out of him. She stared, her mind struggling to connect the image of this quiet, powerful man with the savage cruelty that had marked him. He was a survivor, same as her. He had just been broken in a different way. He must have felt her gaze. He paused, his axe in midair. He did not turn, but he pulled his tunic down, deliberately covering his back. The silence in the lodge grew heavy. He watched her, too. He saw things no one else had bothered to see. He noticed how she never took up space. She sat with her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped tight around her shins, as if she were trying to make herself invisible. He noticed how she ate, quickly, her eyes down, as if she expected the food to be snatched away. And he saw her hands. When she thought he was not looking, she would examine her wrists. The rope burns were healing, turning into slick, pink scars. She would trace them with a finger, her expression one of profound, bottomless shame. She was marked, spoiled. One evening, the wind was quiet. The camp was asleep. The only sound was the pop and hiss of the juniper in the fire. He was mending a tear in his moccasin. She had been watching him for an hour, watching the way his strong, dark hands moved with patience and economy. Her voice, when it came, was a dry croak. She had not used it in over a week. "Why?" He did not look up. He continued his stitching. She tried again, forcing the word out, louder. "Why did you help me?" He paused. He set the moccasin down. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. He did not seem to understand. Lottie gestured, mimicking the act of being tied to the post. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Then she pointed to him. "You? Why?" He understood. He stared into the fire, his gaze distant. He was silent for so long. She thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, and the English was broken, learned from traders and soldiers. "You were left," he said. He touched his own chest. "Like I was, once, by my own people, for a crime I did not do." He looked at her, his black eyes meeting hers. "I remember the cold." She had no answer for that. She just watched him pick up his moccasin and begin to stitch again. 2 days later, the real blizzard came. The blue norther had been a prelude. This was a white monster that descended from the north and swallowed the canyon whole. The wind screamed. a constant, high-pitched wail that sounded like a woman dying. Snow piled up the sides of the lodge until they were buried in it. For 3 days, no one left their lodges. The world stopped. The small lodge became a prison. The air grew thick with the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies. They were trapped. The awkwardness was a living thing between them. They were only 6 feet apart, day and night. She slept in her furs. He in his... She turned her back to him, but she was aware of every breath he took, every time he shifted. The tension was sharp, a different kind of fear. He was a man, and she knew what men did when they were trapped with a woman. But he did nothing. He respected the space between them as if it were a solid wall. Food ran low. His store of dried venison and corn was small. On the 3rd day of the blizzard, he took the last piece of dried meat. It was barely enough for one man. He cut it in 2 with his knife. He held out the larger piece to her. Lottie looked at the meat, then at him. "No," she whispered. "You are the hunter. You need it." He did not argue. He simply placed her portion on the flat stone near her sleeping furs. He ate his own small piece in 3 bites. They drank melted snow. The hunger was sharp, but the silence that followed was different. It was shared. The storm howled. The lodge shuddered under the force of the wind. Lottie was tending the fire, adding a small piece of wood, when Sato moved to get the water skin, which was near her. His hand, reaching for the skin, brushed her wrist, the one that was scarred. Lottie flinched. It was not a small movement. She recoiled, scrambling backward, a choked gasp escaping her. She fell against the wall of the lodge, her eyes wide, her hand held to her chest. It was the old terror, instant and absolute. Sato froze. He looked at his hand, then at her. He saw her face, pale and terrified in the firelight. He saw the memory of Jed and Pike and all the others. He drew his hand back slowly. He sat on his heels. He waited until her breathing eased, until her eyes were focused on him again. He spoke, his voice low and deliberate, forcing the English words to be clear. "I will not take," he said, tapping his own chest, "what you do not give." Lottie stared at him. The wind screamed, but in the lodge, a profound stillness had fallen. He had not just spoken. He had made a promise. It was the first promise of its kind she had ever heard. It was a language she did not know. Her defenses, built up over 10 years of survival, began to crack. The ice that had frozen her soul began to melt. A tear, hot and sudden, spilled from her eye and tracked through the grime on her cheek. Then another. She did not sob. She just wept, silently, the tears coming fast. She huddled by the fire, the tears dripping from her chin, and she began to talk. The words came out in a broken whisper, disjointed and raw. "I was in St. Louis. My aunt," she looked at her hands. "She said I was a burden. She sold me to a man on a riverboat. I was 15. Sato watched her, his face impassive, but his eyes were fixed on her. He did not move. He just listened. He wanted things, all of them. They played cards for me. I was just a thing, a cost." She wiped her face with a shaking hand. No one has ever given me food or a blanket, without a price, without taking." She looked up at him, her eyes raw. "I do not know kindness without a cost. I do not know what this is." She finished, spent, her confession hanging in the smoky air. The lodge was silent again, save for the fire and the storm. Sato looked at the fire, his jaw tight. He let the silence draw out, letting her words settle. Then he spoke. His story was not like hers, but it was. "My brother," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He was young, like the children out there, full of fire." He stared at the flames. "The soldiers came, blue coats. They had a paper. They said this land was theirs. that we had to go to the reservation. A bad place, no buffalo. My father, the chief, he would not sign. My brother, he took a knife. He ran at the soldier. He was a boy. Sato's hand clenched into a fist. They shot him. Here. He touched his own chest. And here. They killed him. For nothing. For paper. He turned his arm over, pushing up the leather sleeve. In the firelight, she saw it clearly. The ugly, puckered brand of a T on his forearm. They called me traitor, he said, his voice flat, but full of a cold, ancient rage. Because I would not go, because I would not leave the bones of my father and the blood of my brother. This is their mark. They say I am not Comanche. I am not white. I am nothing. He looked at her. I know what it is. To be unseen. To be less. They sat there. Two broken souls, marked by the world. Exposed in the dim light. He, the warrior, branded a traitor. She, the girl, sold for $40. The gap between them, the few feet of dirt floor, was no longer an empty space. It was filled with their shared pain. She saw him, not as a savage, not as her captor. She saw a man who understood the cold. He saw her, not as a white woman, not as a broken saloon girl. He saw someone who had endured. Slowly, Lottie moved. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She uncurled herself, moving from her place of safety. She crawled across the space between them. He did not move. He watched her, his breath held. She stopped in front of him. She was trembling. She reached out a shaking hand, not to his face, but to his. She touched the back of his hand, the one that had held the knife, the one that had cut her free. Her fingers were cold. His skin was warm. She lifted her face. Her eyes were still wet. It was an invitation, a question. Sato looked at her for a long moment. He saw her fear and her courage. He leaned forward, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not the wet, drunken kiss of the saloon, or the brutal kiss of possession. It was hesitant. It was trembling. It was the touch of two ghosts, proving to each other they were real. It was chaste and brief, and tasted of juniper smoke, and the salt of her tears, and a pain so deep it had finally found its echo. When he pulled back, he did not smile. He just looked at her, and for the first time since she was a child, Lottie felt seen. The snow did not vanish. It surrendered. It gave up its hold on the canyon inch by inch, weeping into the thirsty red dirt. The first sound Lottie learned to trust was the drip of water from the cliff edges, a steady rhythm that promised change. The cold, dry bite of the air was replaced by the smell of wet stone and thawing earth. She grew stronger. The broth and meat Sato provided had put flesh back on her bones, and the herbal paste had healed her wrists, leaving them slick with new, pink scars. She was no longer a guest, nor was she a captive. She was present, and in the small, contained world of the lodge. Idleness was a burden. She began to work. At first, she only ventured as far as the creek, now a rushing, angry torrent of snowmelt. She would follow the other women. Keeping her distance, they carried heavy, waterskin bags. Lottie had nothing, so she used the small pot from Sato's lodge. It took her 4 trips to equal one of theirs. The women ignored her. Mostly, all except the young one with the sharp eyes, the one called Little Fox. She watched Lottie stumble on the slick rocks. Her thin moccasins, a pair Sato had left for her, soaking through. The white woman is weak, Little Fox said in her own tongue, just loud enough for the others to hear. She carries water like a child. Her skin is the color of a fish belly. The women laughed. Lottie kept her eyes on the ground, filled the pot, and began the slow, careful walk back to the lodge. She did not cry. She did not hurry. She just carried the water. She watched them tan hides, It was brutal work. The women, their arms stained dark, scraped the last bits of flesh from the stiff buffalo skins. Their ulus, a curved blade, moving with an experience Lottie could not comprehend. They worked with a rhythm, gossiping and complaining, their hands strong and sure. Lottie was useless. She knew it. She was a saloon girl. She knew how to pour whiskey, how to count coins, how to lie still in the dark. She knew nothing of survival. An older woman, Gray Willow, whose face was a kind map of wrinkles, watched Lottie watching them. Gray Willow said nothing, but she left one of the heavy scraping tools on a log when she went to rest. Lottie picked it up. It was heavy, the stone blade lashed to a bone handle. She found a corner of a hide that no one was working on and knelt. She put the blade to the skin and pushed. It skipped, doing nothing. She pushed harder, using her weight. The tool bit, tearing a small hole in the hide. Little Fox cackled. "The ghost face breaks it. She is clumsy like a blind bear." Lottie's face burned hot. She wanted to throw the tool down and run back to the lodge, back to the safety of the furs, but she looked at her hands, at the scars on her wrists. She thought of Jedediah Sykes. She thought of the post. She took a breath, adjusted her grip, and scraped again. Softer this time. The flesh and fat curled away from the skin. It was disgusting. It was hard. Her back ached within minutes. Her hands, soft from weeks of inactivity, blistered. The blisters broke, and she scraped with bleeding palms. She worked for an hour, creating one small, clean patch on the massive hide. When Sato returned from checking his traps, he found her asleep in the furs, her hands curled by her face. They were raw. He looked at them, then at the hide outside. He did not wake her, but later that night, he silently handed her a small tin of hardened tallow, rendered from deer fat. She looked at him, confused, and he nodded toward her hands. She rubbed the grease into her palms, the sting easing. He had seen. He was beginning to see all of her. He watched her. He had saved her because she was a discarded thing, and he recognized the look. He had expected her to remain that way, broken, fearful, and weak. The whites he knew were soft. They relied on their loud guns and their endless, empty words. But this woman was not soft. She was quiet. She endured the mockery of the other women without a word. She took on work that was not hers, and she did it badly, but she did not stop. He had seen her fall on the ice at the creek, spilling her water. He had watched her stand, her chin high, and walk back to the creek to fill the pot again, her clothes soaked in freezing water. She had a different kind of strength. It was not his strength, the strength of a rock that meets force with force. Hers was the strength of the willow branch in a blizzard, which bends and does not break. And when the snow melts, it is still there. He was surprised to find that he respected it. He respected her. One afternoon, the sun was bright, the first truly warm day of the changing season. Lottie sat outside the lodge, rubbing the tallow into her hands, letting the warmth soak into her skin. Nearby, 2 young boys, maybe 8 or 9 years of age, were shouting. They had a snare, a simple loop of rawhide, and had caught a large snowshoe rabbit. The rabbit was already dead, but the boys were in a fierce dispute. "I set the trap," the first one yelled, grabbing for the rabbit. "But I checked it," the second one retorted, pulling it back. "The fur is mine. The meat is worth more. I will take the meat. You take the feet." "The feet? Are you a fool? The fur is what we use." They began to wrestle, a frantic, disorganized tumble of fur leggings and flailing arms. They rolled in the slushy, muddy snow, each grabbing for the rabbit, pulling it back and forth between them. Lottie watched them. It was such a simple, childish fight. It was not about cruelty or shame or cost. It was just 2 boys, arguing over a rabbit. It was the most normal thing she had seen in 10 years. A sound built in her chest. It was a strange pressure. It came out as a puff of air, a rusty cough. She realized, with a shock, what it was. She was laughing. It was a small, soft sound, like a bird stirring in a nest. It barely lasted a second. She clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes widening, as if she had broken a rule. She looked around, terrified. Sato was near the pony line, mending a leather bridle. He had stopped his work. He was looking directly at her. His expression was still, as it always was, but his eyes were fixed on her mouth. He had heard it, the sound of her laugh, fragile and uncertain, hung in the air between them. Lottie's face flushed. She looked down at her hands, deeply embarrassed. But the cold, tight knot that lived in her stomach had eased, just for a moment. The distance between them in the lodge began to shrink. It was no longer two halves of a room, his and hers. It became a shared space. The glances over the fire were no longer just about checking on a threat. He would watch her eat the stew he had made, and she would meet his gaze, just for a second, before looking away. One evening, a late, wet flurry of snow began to fall. She was returning with a bundle of firewood, her head down. He was standing by the lodge flap, waiting. As she passed him to enter, he reached out. This time, she did not flinch. She froze, her breath catching. He reached out slowly, his movement deliberate, giving her time to pull away. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed the snow from her hair, grazing her temple. The touch was light, impossibly gentle. She did not pull back. She just closed her eyes, her body trembling slightly, and allowed the touch. He let his hand fall. Their bond deepened in these silences. He would hand her a bowl, and his fingers would brush hers. She no longer snatched her hand away. One night, while he was cleaning his rifle, she saw him wince as he reached, his back giving him a pang of pain where the brand was. Without thinking, she moved. She put her hand on his forearm. Just a light touch. He stopped his work, his muscles tensing under her palm. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She said nothing. She was just there. She was seeing his pain. He slowly relaxed, accepting the gesture. But the fear remained. The desire between them was a new, dangerous thing. It was a charge in the air of the small lodge. But she was still haunted. She knew what intimacy was. It was a transaction. It was a thing men took from her. It was the rent she paid to exist. She still slept in her own furs, her back turned to him. She would lie awake, listening to him breathe, terrified of what he might do, and even more terrified of what she might want. Sato understood. He saw the terror in her when he moved too quickly. He saw the saloon girl rise up, the girl with the dead eyes, ready to endure what she must. So he made no move. He was a hunter. He knew how to wait. He would not take what she did not give. The change came with another storm. This one was not snow, but a cold, driving rain that turned the canyon into a river of mud. The wind whipped the rain against the hide lodge, a sound like a dozen hands slapping the walls. It was impossible to go outside. They were trapped again, just as they had been in the blizzard. But this time, the air was not thick with awkwardness. It was thick with a heavy, unspoken need. The fire was low, casting long, dancing shadows. Lottie was restless. She could not sit still. She paced the small circle of the lodge, from the door to her furs, her arms wrapped around her waist. She was at war with herself. He was the man who had cut her down. He had kept her warm. He had fed her. He had touched her hair and asked for nothing. He had seen her bleed and given her tallow for her hands. He had waited. She knew what she wanted, and the wanting was the most terrifying thing of all. To want was to open herself. To want was to give. She had never given anything. It had always been taken. Sato sat on his furs, watching her. He was sharpening his knife. The rhythmic shing, shing, shing of the stone on the steel filling the lodge. Lottie stopped her pacing. She stood in the center of the lodge, her body shaking. He stopped sharpening. He looked up. She made the choice. She crossed the small space, the 4 steps of dirt floor, and knelt in front of him. He did not move. He just watched her, his eyes dark, questioning. She lifted a trembling hand. She did not touch his face or his arm. She placed her palm flat against his chest, over the steady, slow beat of his heart. The warmth of his skin soaked into her cold hand. Her voice was a whisper, so low he almost did not hear it over the rain. "Don't leave me alone tonight." The words cost her every bit of courage she had. Sato stopped breathing. He looked down at her hand on his chest. Then he covered her hand with his own. His skin was rough against hers. "I am here," he said. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He waited. She leaned forward, her body surrendering, and rested her forehead against his shoulder. He put his arms around her, pulling her close. She trembled violently, like a frightened animal. He just held her. He held her while the rain hammered the lodge, rubbing her back, his hand warm and steady. She was just held. It was a feeling she had never known. When her trembling eased, he kissed her. It was not the chaste, desperate kiss of the blizzard. This was deep and slow. It was a question and a promise. She answered by leaning into him, her lips parting. He lifted her. She was still light, but she was not the bundle of sticks he had pulled from the post. She was a woman. He carried her the few steps to his sleeping furs and laid her down. He unfastened the ties of her leather shirt, and with a reverence that shamed every man who had come before, he looked at her. He looked at her pale skin, at the faded bruises, at the new scars on her wrists. He touched them, not with hunger, but with recognition. He kissed the rope burns. He kissed the scar on her shoulder where a man in Kansas had bit her. This was not a taking. It was an uncovering. It was an act of healing. When he came to her, it was not the brutal, fast work of the saloon. It was slow and gentle. It was a quiet rebellion against all the cruelty they had both known. It was 2 broken souls, in the dark, in the storm, making each other whole. Lottie woke first. The lodge was quiet. The storm had passed. A single sharp beam of sunlight pierced the smoke hole, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She was warm, incredibly warm. She was pressed against Sato's back, her front to his scarred back. His arm was draped over her waist, his hand resting on her hip. He was holding her, even in sleep. Her first thought was panic. What did I do? What is the cost? She tried to slip away, to disentangle herself before he woke, before the bill came due. As she moved, his arm tightened. He mumbled something in his sleep, a low sound, and pulled her closer, fitting her body into his. Lottie went still. She lay there, wrapped in his arms, in his furs. She listened to his deep, even breathing. She was not hurt. She was not cold. She did not feel shame. She felt safe. She looked around the small, smoky lodge, his rifle leaning against the wall, the small pot she used for water, the medicine bundle hanging from a lodge pole. It was not a palace. It was not even a house. But as she lay there, held by this silent, scarred man, she allowed a fragile thought to enter her mind. For the first time in her life, she might have a place. She might belong somewhere. He woke slowly, his eyes opening. He found her watching him. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his gaze soft in the morning light. He brushed the tangled hair from her face. Lottie did something she had not done since she was a small child. She smiled, a true, slow smile. The peace lasted for 2 days. Then, a commotion outside the lodge shattered the morning quiet. Shouts, angry voices. Sato was on his feet in an instant, the man of peace replaced by the warrior. He grabbed his leggings and his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered. But Lottie, her heart pounding with a new, cold dread, followed him. She pulled a fur around her shoulders and peered from behind the lodge flap. 2 Comanche scouts had returned. They were speaking to Stans Tall, the elder, their voices sharp with urgency. Other warriors were gathering.
3 riders,
one scout said, pointing east.
They cut our traps. They carry rifles.
White men, the other spat. They are riding the hills, looking for the canyon pass. One warrior, Little Fox's husband, saw Sato. His face was a mask of contempt. He looked at Sato, then at the lodge, where he knew Lottie was hiding. He spoke, his voice loud, meant for her to hear. The white men ride close. Maybe they are looking for their broken toy. Another warrior laughed, a short, harsh sound. They want their toy back, the one they threw away. Broken toy. The words hit Lottie like a physical blow. The safety, the warmth, the fragile sense of belonging. It all shattered. The smile she had given Sato. The night in his arms. It was all a lie. She was still Lottie from the saloon. She was the woman tied to the post. She was a thing, a toy. She stumbled back into the lodge, nausea rising in her throat. She was shaking again, but this time it was not from cold. It was from shame. Sato entered the lodge seconds later. His face was granite. He had heard. "They are coming," he said, his voice flat. Lottie was already moving. She was scrambling, grabbing her old, stiff boots. She was grabbing the tattered dress he had cut from her, the one she had kept bundled in a corner. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I am leaving." Her voice was a terrified whisper. "They are coming for me. They will kill you. They will kill everyone here. Just for me." "Where will you go?" "Back," she choked, the word tasting like ash. "Back to the town. If I go back, if I give myself to them, maybe they will leave you alone." He crossed the lodge in one step and grabbed her arm. His grip was not gentle. It was iron. "Go back," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "To them, to the sheriff who watched, to the post. You go back, and they will shame you again. They will laugh again. And this time, they will finish the job." Lottie was sobbing, fat, hot tears of rage and despair streaming down her face. "It does not matter," she screamed, striking his chest with her free hand. "They already broke me. Do you not see? I am a broken toy. That is all I am." He stared at her, his grip tightening for a second. He saw her, not as the woman who had laughed, not as the woman who had slept in his arms. He saw the creature he had found in the snow, empty-eyed and waiting for death. He let go of her arm. His voice, when he spoke, was as cold and sharp as the blade he carried. "Then let them see what they made." Lottie's world, which had just begun to take shape, dissolved. She stood frozen, the tattered remains of her old dress clutched in her hand. Sato's words, "Then let them see what they made," were not a comfort. They were a judgment. They were a declaration of war. He did not wait for her to speak. He did not comfort her or touch her. The man who had held her, who had brushed snow from her hair, was gone. In his place was the man who had survived the brand and the bullet, the man who knew the cold. He moved with a terrible, contained purpose. He went to the corner of the lodge and retrieved a tool, a heavy, sharp-bladed spade used for digging roots in frozen ground. He checked his rifle, the one he had so carefully cleaned, and slid a full box of cartridges into his belt pouch. He took his knife, sliding it from its sheath to check the edge, and ran his thumb lightly along the blade before returning it. Every motion was economical, silent, and final. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, and left the lodge without a backward glance. Lottie sank to the furs, her legs giving way. The smell of him, of smoke and leather, was still on the sleeping robes. She heard the sounds of the camp. It was not a camp in panic. It was a camp preparing, The women were quiet, gathering children, dousing unnecessary fires. The men were checking their own weapons. They were not preparing to fight for Sato, they were preparing for the consequences of Sato. She was the sickness. She was the poison Stan's Tall had warned of. She had brought this. She sat for an hour, numb. Then, a new, cold resolve settled over her. She could not run. She could not go back. The only thing she could do was see it through. She pulled the thickest fur robe around her, the one he had used, and went outside. The canyon was cold. The promise of spring had vanished, replaced by a gray, metallic sky. She saw him, a distant figure, at the mouth of the canyon where the pass narrowed between two sheer walls of rock. He was digging. She walked toward him. The few tribe members she passed gave her a wide berth. Their faces were closed, their eyes hard with accusation. She was the ghost face, the broken toy. And she was bringing the blue-coat soldiers, the death that always followed white people. He did not stop his work when she approached. He was digging behind a cluster of high boulders, a natural choke point in the pass. He was not digging a grave. He was digging a shallow scrape in the hard, rocky soil, just deep enough to shield his body, just wide enough to brace his rifle. He piled the stones in front of him, creating a small, deadly nest. He had chosen his ground. It was a place a single man could hold, for a time, against many. She stood there, watching him work, the wind pulling at her hair. The steady thunk and scrape of the tool against the earth was the only sound. When he was satisfied, he tossed the spade aside, settled into the position, and sighted his rifle down the pass. He was satisfied. The sun was beginning to dip, turning the gray sky to a bruised purple. The cold was deepening. "Please," Lottie whispered. Her voice was thin, stolen by the wind. He did not turn. He kept his eyes on the pass. "Please, Sato, don't do this." She stepped closer, her boots unsteady on the rocks. "There are 6 of them, maybe more. You are one man. This is suicide." He laid the rifle down and began to arrange his cartridges on a flat stone, placing them in a neat, shining row. She grew desperate. She came up beside him, kneeling in the dirt, grabbing his arm. His muscles were like stone. "You'll die," she cried, her voice cracking. "You will die. For me. For what they called me. I am not worth this. I am not worth your life." He stopped his work. He turned, his face unreadable in the twilight. He looked at her, his black eyes seeming to pierce right through her. "They left you to die," he said, his voice flat, a statement of fact. "That was their choice. This is mine." "But it's for me," she insisted, tears of rage and shame welling. "No," he said, and his voice was cold. "It is not just for you. It is for this." He touched the rock he knelt on. "This is our land. This is our home. They come here. They call you a toy. They laugh. If I let them pass, if I let them take you, they will come again. They will come for the women. They will come for the horses. They will come until it is all gone. A line must be drawn. I will draw it here." He turned back to the pass. "They left you to die. If I do not stand, they will do it again, and again." The conversation was over. He had made his choice. He was not just protecting her. He was protecting the world he had built, a world that now included her. She retreated to the lodge as full darkness fell. The camp was holding its breath. She did not build up the fire. She sat in the cold, listening. He came back hours later, long after the moon was high. He entered the lodge silently. He had not been relieved. No one had offered to take his place. He had come back for his own reasons. He said nothing. Lottie looked at him in the faint glow of the banked coals. His face was a mask, his body taut. He was a man facing his own death. She did not speak. She did not beg him again. She simply rose, went to him, and began to untie the leather ties of his tunic. He let her hands were trembling, but she was methodical. She undressed him, and he her. Their love-making that night was not the gentle, healing act of the storm. It was a desperate, fierce thing. It was a clinging. It was teeth and hands and a silent, driving need to affirm life in the immediate, suffocating presence of death. It was full of passion and a profound, bottomless sorrow. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They held each other in the darkness, two souls bracing for the dawn. When Lottie woke, the lodge was empty. The fur beside her was cold. A hollow, sick dread filled her. It was not the terror of the post. It was the terror of loss. She pulled the fur around her, her heart a cold, heavy stone, and ran from the lodge. The camp was awake. The sky was a pale, watery gray. It was not yet dawn, but the light was coming. She saw the warriors, mounted on their ponies, hidden in the rocks at the high edges of the canyon. They were not at the pass. They were observers. They would defend the camp if it was attacked, but they would not join Sato's fight. It was his. Stans Tall was watching, his arms crossed, his face like granite. Lottie ignored them. She scrambled up the side of the canyon, not as high as the warriors, but high enough. She found a cleft in the rock, a place where she could see the pass, and she hid. She was a coward, and she knew it, but she had to watch. She did not wait long. She heard them first, the metallic jingle of a bridle, a loud, sharp laugh, the crunch of hooves on gravel. They appeared, framed against the gray morning light. 6 riders. Lottie's stomach clenched. She knew them. Jedediah Sykes was in the lead, his hat tilted back, a rifle resting across his lap, and beside him, Pike, his mean eyes scanning the rocks. The other 4 were Circle C hands, men whose faces she knew from the saloon, men who had laughed. They rode with arrogance, like they owned the land. They rode straight into the narrowest part of the pass. "This is it, boys," Jed called out, his voice echoing. "This is where the tracks lead. He's in here somewhere, and he's got our girl." They pulled up, their horses sensing the tension. The pass was quiet. Too quiet. "Come on out, Injun," Pike yelled, drawing his pistol. "We know you're in here. Give us the whore, and we might let you live." A figure rose from the rocks. Sato. He did not rise from his hiding place. He stood up, tall and alone, in the middle of the pass. Not 30 yards from them. He held his rifle low, at his waist. He was a single defiant man of rock and leather. The 6 men reined in, their horses shifting nervously. They were stunned by the audacity of it. Jed recovered first, a slow, ugly grin spreading across his face. "Well, looky here, a lone buck. Thought there'd be a whole war party." He spat. "Where's our girl? Savage, the one you stole." "I see her," Pike suddenly shouted, pointing up at the rocks. "There, up on the ridge. It's her." Lottie flinched, pressing herself flatter, her heart stopping. Jed's grin widened. He looked from Sato to Lottie's hiding spot and back. "She ain't yours," he sneered, his voice full of casual ownership. "She's town property. Hell, I paid for her first, more times than I can count. She owes me." He unslung his own rifle from his saddle. "Hand her over, and we'll just take your horse and supplies. We won't even kill you. Much." Sato did not speak. His silence was more terrifying than any war cry. He just stood, watching Jed. "Last chance. Injun." Jed said he was tired of the game. He began to lift his rifle, bringing the stock to his shoulder. The canyon exploded. Sato's rifle cracked, the sound a single, sharp thunderclap that slammed against the rock walls. Jedediah Sykes was thrown backward off his horse, a dark, spreading stain blooming on his chest. He was dead before he hit the ground. It all happened in 3 heartbeats. Pike, his face a mask of shock, fumbled for his pistol. Sato worked the lever of his rifle, the shuck click of the action sharp and clean. He fired again. Pike jerked, dropping his gun, a red spray erupting from his throat as he toppled sideways from his saddle. A third man, a young ranch hand, finally cleared his weapon and fired wildly. The bullet sparked off the boulder near Sato's head. Sato did not flinch. He swiveled, leveled the rifle, and fired a third time. The man screamed and fell, clutching his stomach. 3 men were down. The remaining 3 broke. The arrogance, the laughter. It was all gone, replaced by raw, animal panic. One of them, a boy Lottie had seen only once, wheeled his horse so violently it almost fell. He lashed it with his reins, galloping madly back down the pass, never once looking back. He was the one who would escape. The other 2 were finished. One was still on his horse, clutching a shattered shoulder, his face white with shock. The other was on the ground, his leg trapped beneath his dead horse, his own rifle lost, wounded, disarmed. Silence fell, thick and heavy, smelling of gunpowder and blood. Sato stood in the smoke, his rifle still held at the ready. Then, from her hiding place, Lottie saw him sway. He put a hand to his left side, just below his ribs. When he pulled it away, it was dark with blood. The wild shot, it had hit him. "Sato!" Her scream was thin, torn from her throat. She scrambled down the rocks, falling, sliding, cutting her hands, running to him. She reached him just as the Comanche warriors, led by Stands Tall, rode down from the ridges. They arrived too late for the fight. It was over. They surrounded the scene, their horses prancing nervously around the bodies. They saw the dead white men. They saw the 2 wounded survivors groaning in the dirt. And they saw Lottie, the pale woman, reached Sato, her hands grabbing at his tunic, coming away covered in his blood. He was grazed, a deep, hot tear along his side, but he was standing. He shoved her hands away, not unkindly, and straightened. He faced the elders, his rifle still in his grip. Stands Tall surveyed the carnage. His face was grim, carved from old wood. He looked at the bodies, then at the blood on Sato's side. "You have done this," the elders said, his voice a low rumble. "You have spilled their blood at the gate of our winter home. Their soldiers will come now." "They came," Sato said, his voice tight with pain. "I finished it." "You fought for her," another warrior accused, spitting the word, pointing at Lottie. "For a white. She is not one of us. This was not our fight." Sato looked at the warrior, then at Stands Tall. He met the elder's gaze, his own eyes burning with fever and defiance. He gave his answer, simple and absolute. "I protected what was mine." Every eye in the past turned to Lottie. She stood beside Sato, his blood on her hands, her dress, her face. She was the cause. She was the ghost, the broken toy, the source of this war. She was trembling, the terror and the adrenaline making her sick. She could see the contempt in their eyes. She was a thing, a burden. She remembered his other words. Let them see what they made. She stepped forward. Away from the protection of Sato's side, she stood in the open, small and pale, surrounded by armed warriors and dead men. She looked at Stands Tall. Her voice was a ragged tremor, but it was clear, and it carried in the cold, still air. "He didn't take me," she said. The warriors murmured, surprised she would speak, surprised at her plain words. "I was left," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. She pointed a shaking, bloody finger at the body of Jed Sykes. "By them, I was tied to a post, in the snow, to die. They laughed." She turned, her eyes finding Sato. He was watching her, his face pale, but his gaze steady. Her love for him was a raw, aching thing, visible for all to see. "I stayed," she said, her voice breaking. She looked back at the elder. I stayed because he sees me. The pass was silent, save for the wind, the groans of the wounded, and the frantic, wet sobs of the man whose leg was pinned. Lottie's words hung in the air, a thin, desperate defense. Stan's Tall looked at her. His face was unmoving, his eyes black and deep. He saw the blood on her hands, the terror in her eyes, and the defiance that had made her speak. He looked at Sato, who was leaning heavily on his rifle, his side dark with blood, but his gaze unwavering. The elder turned his pony, addressing the other warriors. His voice was low, but it cut through the cold air. "This is a bad day," he said in his own tongue. "This man," he nodded at Sato, "has brought the wasp's nest to our door. He spilled blood for a white. He has made his choice, and we have made ours." Lottie's heart sank. She thought this was it, the judgment. Stan's Tall continued. "He is one of us, though he walks his own path. The woman is his, her life is his, her trouble is his." He looked back at Lottie, his gaze cold. "She is not us. She will not come to our fires. She will not eat from our pots. She is his shadow. He will keep her, and he will keep her trouble, away from our lodges." It was a harsh decree, but it was not a sentence of death. It was an agreement, a reluctant, cold acceptance. Sato had claimed her, and in doing so, had drawn a line not just against the white men, but within his own tribe. He was now an island, and she was on it with him. The tension remained, thick and metallic. Little Fox, sitting on her pony behind her husband, stared at Lottie with pure, undiluted hatred. Lottie had brought this. Lottie had cost them. Stan's Tall gave a sharp order. 2 warriors dismounted. They walked past Lottie and Sato. One went to the man with the shattered shoulder, who was trying to crawl away. The other went to the man pinned by the dead horse. There was no mercy, just the hard, practical finality of 2 knife strokes. The groans stopped. "The one who ran," Stan's Tall said to Sato, "will bring the soldiers. You have bought us perhaps 10 days, maybe 12. The snow in the high passes will slow them, but they will come. You must be gone before them, or you must be dead." He wheeled his horse. "Clean this." The warriors rode away, leaving them alone in the pass with the 6 dead men, the dead horses, and the blood soaking into the thawing ground. Lottie looked at the carnage. She looked at Jed, his eyes open, staring at the gray sky. She had wished him dead 1,000 times. Now he was, and she felt nothing but a cold, hollow sickness. "We must," Sato said, his voice strained. He was losing blood. The work was grim. Sato, with his one good arm, helped her pull the bodies. They could not dig graves in the rocky soil. They dragged them, one by one, to a deep crevasse, a flaw in the rock not far from the pass. It was a grave made by the earth itself. Lottie did not let herself think. She just worked. She took Jed's feet. Sato took his shoulders. They dragged him. The sound of his boots scraping the rock was a terrible, scratching sound. They pushed him over the edge. He fell and did not make a sound. They did this for all 5. Pike, the others. It took 2 hours. Her back ached. Her hands were raw. She was covered in their blood. And his, when the last man was gone, she stood, breathing heavily, her body shaking with exhaustion. She had buried her monsters. "Now, the horses," Sato said. "They cut the saddles and bridles free, a valuable prize. The meat," Sato said, "was for the wolves. It would keep them busy." Only then, when the pass was clear, did he let his own pain show. He slumped against the rock wall, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "You are hurt," she said, her voice flat. "It is a scratch," he said. "You are bleeding." She tore a strip of cloth from her own worn sleeve. "Let me see." He did not argue. He let her lead him back to the lodge, his steps slow, his weight leaning on her. The camp watched them go. No one offered to help. They were alone. Inside the small, smoky lodge, she helped him sit on his furs. The air was thick with the memory of the night before, a lifetime ago. "Take it off," she said. He grunted in pain as he pulled the blood-soaked tunic over his head. The wound was worse than she thought. The bullet had not gone in, but it had torn a long, deep furrow across his shoulder and ribs, a raw, red canyon of flesh. It was oozing dark blood. "It's on your shoulder," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And your side." She thought of how he had found her, how he had cleaned her wounds. Now, the roles were reversed. She took the pot she used for water, filled it, and set it on the fire to boil. She found his medicine bundle and took the same yarrow and willow bark he had used on her. She found a clean strip of doe skin, and she found his sewing kit, a sharp bone awl and a length of dried sinew. She had sewn dresses. She had sewn curtains. She had never sewn a man. "This will hurt," she said, her voice small. He just nodded, his eyes closed. She washed the wound. She scrubbed the gunpowder and dirt from the raw flesh. He hissed, his body tensing, but he did not make another sound. She packed the wound with the crushed, wet herbs, and then she took the awl. Her hands were shaking. "I can't." "You must," he said, his voice low, "or the wound will foul. Push it through." She closed her eyes, took a breath, and pushed the sharp bone through his skin. He jerked, a low groan forced from his chest. Lottie bit her own lip until she tasted blood. She pulled the sinew through. She did it again and again, 10 stitches, clumsy and uneven, but they pulled the torn edges of his skin together. She was weeping silently, the tears dripping onto his skin, mixing with his blood. When she was finished, she tied it off, her fingers slick and clumsy. She covered her work with a clean poultice and bound his chest and shoulder with strips of hide. It was done. He was pale, his skin cold. She covered him with the thickest furs. She brewed the last of her willow bark into a bitter tea for the fever she knew was coming. He drank it, his eyes meeting hers. He saw her tears. He lifted his good hand, not to his wound, but to her face. He touched the scar on her wrist, the one that was now covered in his blood. "We are matched now," he whispered. She collapsed beside him, her strength gone. She did not sleep in her own furs. She lay beside him, listening to his breathing, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat, slow and steady. Their bond was no longer just about pain and desire. It was forged in this, in shared blood, in survival, in the choice she had made to speak, and the choice he had made to stand. He was sick for 3 days. The fever came, as she expected. He tossed in the furs, his mind wandering, speaking in his own tongue, low, angry words. Lottie did not leave. She tended the fire. She bathed his face with snow melt. She forced broth between his cracked lips, the same way he had for her. The women of the tribe left food outside the lodge flap. Dried meat, a small pot of corn. It was for Tsato, the warrior, not for her. She ate only after he had taken the scraps. She was his shadow. On the 4th day, his fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear. He saw her, asleep, huddled at the foot of his furs, a bundle of exhaustion. He saw the empty bowl, the tended fire. He sat up, the pull of the stitches sharp. He looked at her work. The sewing was ugly, but it was strong. The wound was closed. When she woke, she found him sitting up, mending his rifle with his one good hand. "You should rest," she said. "The man who ran is moving," he replied. "We cannot rest." He was right. The truce with the tribe was fragile. The air in the canyon was thick with fear. The children no longer played near their lodge. The women gathered in tight, whispering knots, their glances sharp as flint. "Stands tall is right," Tsato said, not looking at her. "We cannot be here. My trouble is not theirs." He stood, his body stiff. He walked outside. Lottie followed. He paced the canyon floor, moving away from the cluster of lodges, toward the far wall, where a small, clear spring trickled from the rock. It was a good spot, sheltered with fresh water. "Here," he said. He picked up a stone and marked the ground. "We will build." "Build? But stands tall said." "He said to be gone before the soldiers. The soldiers cannot ride until the high passes are clear. We have time. We build." It was not a request. He would not be a guest in his own land, and she would not be a burden in his lodge, the one he had grown up in. They would make their own. The work was hard. He was weak, his arm bound to his side. He could only direct. Lottie became his hands. She cut the lodge poles, using his axe. It took her days. Her swings were clumsy, but she did not stop. Her hands, which had healed from the hide scraping, blistered, broke, and healed again, this time into hard, tough calluses. She scraped the new hides Tsato had set aside from the last hunt. She learned to stretch them, to use the awl and sinew, this time for construction, not healing. Gray Willow, the old woman, watched her from a distance. One morning, Lottie found a new, sharper ulu, the curved scraping knife, left on a rock near the new lodge site. She never saw who left it, but she knew. Tsato, sitting against a rock, taught her. He was a patient teacher, his voice low. "No," he would say, as she struggled with a snare. "The loop is too wide. The rabbit will see it. It must be the size of your fist, and it must be placed where the tracks are, not where you want them to be." She failed. The snare was empty for 2 days. On the third, she caught a small snowshoe hare. She brought it back, her chest tight with a strange, fierce pride. She had provided. He showed her how to mark a trail. "The white man looks for a clear path," he said, pushing a small pebble onto a larger rock. "He does not see the small things. This stone, a broken branch. Here, it means water is this way. This one," he made a small scratch in the dirt, "means danger. You must learn to see the small things. The world is speaking. You must learn to listen." She learned. She learned to walk silently, to watch the birds, to smell the air. Her world, which had been the size of a saloon room, the size of a wagon post, expanded. It was now as wide as the canyon, as high as the hawks that circled above. After 10 days, the lodge was finished. It was smaller than his old one, and the hides were not perfectly matched, but it was theirs. They moved his furs, the few pots, and his weapons into it. It was a home. That night, Tsato built a fire in their new hearth. The smoke rose, straight and true. Lottie sat, watching the flames. Her old life felt like a bad dream, a story told about someone else, but there was one piece of it left. In the corner, she had placed the bundle she had grabbed when she thought to flee. Her old dress, the stained, cheap calico thing she had been tied to the post in. It was stiff with blood and mud. She looked at it. It was the dress of Lottie, the saloon girl, the broken toy. She stood. Tsato watched her. She went to the bundle and unrolled it. The smell of whiskey, old sweat, and fear rose from it. She took his hunting knife from its sheath by the door. She went back to the dress and knelt. "That life's done," she said, her voice quiet but hard as river stone. She plunged the knife into the fabric and began to cut. She did not rip it. She cut it, deliberately, into long, thin strips. The sound of the blade shearing the cloth was the only sound. She worked until the dress was just a pile of useless rags. She took the rags, one by one, and fed them to the fire. The flames flared, bright and orange, consuming the last pieces of her past. She watched until every scrap was white ash. Then she went and sat beside Tsato. He put his good arm around her and pulled her close. They sat in silence for a long time. "The man who ran," she said at last. "He is in Trinity Wells by now?" "Yes," Sato said. He will tell the sheriff. They will send soldiers. Yes. What will we do? She asked. Not in fear, but in planning. We wait for the thaw, he said, staring into the fire. Stands tall is right. The soldiers will come. We cannot stay here. This land is sour now. Where will we go? He was quiet for a moment. North, far north, past the reservation lands, past the iron road, to the mountains. I have heard stories of lands where the tribes are still free, where the white men are few, where a man can live with a woman and be left alone. She processed this, leaving, going into the unknown with him. Mixed families, she whispered. She had heard of such things. Outcasts, from both sides. We will be outcasts, he said, as if reading her mind. Lottie looked at her calloused hands, at the new lodge. She thought of the post. I have always been an outcast, she said. At least this time, I will not be alone. He nodded. The plan was set. They would wait for the thaw, and then they would run. The winter began to truly break. The trickle of the thaw became a roar. The creek swelled. Patches of green appeared on the canyon floor. The birds returned, their song sharp in the morning air. The air was warmer, full of the smell of mud and new life. With the warmth came anxiety. A warm pass was a pass soldiers could ride. Lottie found herself restless. She worked. She checked her snares. She gathered the first bitter spring greens. She repaired Sato's moccasins, but her hands needed to be busy. She had taken the bones from the rabbit she had snared. She kept them, cleaned them. She took a shard of flint and began to work on a small, smooth piece of bone from the rabbit's leg. She scraped. She carved. It was clumsy work. She was trying to make a bead. It took her an entire day to make one. Small, imperfect, oblong bead. She did it again and again. She found other bones. From his deer, she carved 5 beads, each one representing something. The post, the storm, the lodge, the blood, the new home. She took a thin, strong strand of leather from his mending kit. She threaded the 5 beads onto it. It was a small, simple, humble thing. That night, she held it in her fist, her palms sweating. Sato was watching her by the firelight. He saw her closed hand, her nervousness. What do you have? He asked. She opened her hand. The small, white beads rested on her palm. I made them, she said, her voice shy. She could face down a warrior, but she could not meet his eyes for this. He looked at the beads, then at her. In my world, she fumbled for the words. When people choose, they have a ring, a circle of gold. She looked at her calloused, scarred hands. I never wore a ring. She held the leather strand out to him. It was not a question. It was a statement. Sato looked at her, at the gift, at the meaning behind it. He saw her, not as the woman he had saved, but as his partner, his woman. He took the strand. He did not put it on her finger. He gently took her left arm. He turned it over. He wrapped the leather strand around her wrist, twice, right over the pail. Puckered scars left by Jedediah's ropes. He tied the knot, firm and secure. This is better, he said. A circle can be broken. This is tied. It is bound. She looked at the white beads against her skin, covering the marks of her shame. He had not replaced her past. He had covered it. He had reclaimed it. He had bound her to him, with her own choice. Spring did not arrive with a soft announcement. It came like a verdict. The snow receded from the canyon floor, leaving behind a world of thick, red mud and the sharp, bright green of new shoots. The creek, which had been a frozen ribbon, was now a loud, churning roar of snowmelt. With the thaw came the birds, and their songs, which had once been a promise of life, now sounded like a warning. The high passes were clear. Lottie felt the change in her own body. She was stronger. Her hands, once soft from disuse, were now a map of calluses and healed blisters. She moved with a new economy, her moccasins making little sound on the damp earth. She and Sato had settled into a rhythm in their new lodge. They were a single unit, speaking little, understanding much. They checked their snares. They gathered the bitter roots that pushed up from the mud. They prepared for their journey north. Sato's side had healed. The ugly, puckered stitches she had made were gone, leaving a long, pale scar that matched the others on his body. He was marked, as she was. He was training her, every day, in the hard language of survival. But the peace was fragile. It was the quiet of a deer listening for the snap of a twig. The man who had escaped, the boy from the ranch, had been gone for nearly 3 weeks. They both knew what was coming. It came on a Tuesday. In the late morning, the sun was bright, the air warm. Lottie was scraping a rabbit hide, the bone beads on her wrist clicking softly as she worked. She heard the call first, a high single bird cry from the warrior posted on the canyon rim. It was not a call of greeting. It was an alarm. The camp froze. The sound of children playing stopped. The women, working on a large buffalo hide, all stood at once, their scraping tools in hand. Sato emerged from their lodge, his rifle already in his hand. He did not look at her. He looked toward the pass. "Inside," he said. "No," Lottie replied, her voice low. She stood, dropping the hide. "Not this time. I will not hide." He looked at her, a flicker of hard pride in his eyes. He nodded once. They came, not with the whooping chaos of the ranchers, but with the steady, grim cadence of the law. There were 5 of them. They wore the dark blue of the cavalry, with a single man in the lead wearing a dusty brown coat and a marshal's star. They were not boys out for a laugh. They were hard, bearded men who looked like they had seen everything. They rode with their rifles held across their saddles, their eyes scanning the lodges, the rocks, the people. The camp gathered. Stan's Tall emerged, his arms crossed. The other warriors fanned out, silent, appearing on the low rocks around the camp, their own weapons visible. It was a silent, tense welcome. The marshal in the lead held up his hand. He was a man in his 50s, with a face like dried leather and pale, cold blue eyes. "We are not here for a fight," he called out, his voice a gravelly boom that echoed in the canyon. "We are here by authority of the United States Army and the great state of Texas. We are looking for a kidnapped girl, a white woman, name of Charlotte." He scanned the faces, his eyes passing over the Comanche women. And then he saw Lottie. She was standing just beside Sato, in her hide dress, her hair braided. He stared. He had expected a cowering, weeping victim. He saw a woman who looked like she belonged there. "Ma'am?" he called, his voice losing some of its certainty. "Miss Charlotte?" Lottie felt Sato tense. He took one step forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. His rifle was low, but the message was clear. Lottie put her hand on his arm, his good arm. "No," she whispered. "This is my words, not yours." She stepped out from behind him. She walked forward, alone, into the open space between the soldiers and the tribe. She stopped, maybe 30 feet from the marshal's horse. Her heart was a hammer, but her hands were steady. "My name is Lottie," she said, her voice clear and strong. It did not tremble. "I am not Miss Charlotte, and I am not kidnapped." The marshal, Kane, stared at her. He looked at her dress, at her calloused hands, at the bone beads on her wrist. A look of deep, profound confusion crossed his face. "Ma'am, we were told, a ranch hand from the Circle C rode into Fort Griffin, said you'd been taken, that a buck here had murdered 5 men to keep you." "5 men," Lottie said, her voice flat. "They came here. They came for me. They called me a toy." They called me a whore. She could feel the stares of the tribe on her back, hear the sharp intake of breath from Little Fox. She did not care. Before that, Lottie continued, those same men, led by Jedediah Sykes, dragged me from the saloon in Trinity Wells. They tied me to a wagon post on the edge of the territory, in a blizzard, as a joke. She held up her left wrist, pushing back the leather strand. The pink, puckered scars were vivid in the morning light. They left me to die. The sheriff did nothing. The town watched. Her gaze was locked on the marshal. She nodded back to Sato, found me. He cut me down. He kept me alive. He did not take me. He saved me. She dropped her arm. I am not going back. This is my home. The silence that followed was absolute. The 5 lawmen looked at each other, then at Lottie. Marshal Kane's face hardened. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, rigid duty. Ma'am, he said, his voice clipped. You may be confused. You may have sympathies, but the law is the law. You are a white woman. You belong with your own people. You will come with us. Now. I will not, Lottie said. That was not a request. The marshal's hand moved to the rifle on his saddle. Sato's voice cut the air, low and dangerous. She stays. He moved to stand beside Lottie, his own rifle coming up. The barrel pointed at the marshal's chest. I am a U.S. Marshal. Kane growled. You fire on me, and I will bring 500 soldiers back. We will burn this canyon from one end to the other. You will be the first to die, Sato replied, his voice calm. The soldiers raised their rifles. The click, click, click of hammers being cocked echoed off the rock. The warriors on the ridges drew their bows. Lottie stood between them, her body vibrating with tension. This was it, the end. The world would end in blood, all because of her. Hold! Stans Tall walked into the open space. He carried no weapon. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of an old man who had seen too much. He stopped and faced the marshal. I am Stans Tall, he said. This is our land. That is your law. They do not mix here. I have my orders, old man, Kane said, his rifle still aimed at Sato. I am taking the woman. You will take nothing, Stans Tall said. You will only die, and more of my people will die, and more of your soldiers will come. It is a stupid circle. It ends today. The elder looked at Lottie, then at Sato. His face was full of a weary anger. He had not wanted this. He turned back to the marshal. You are here for the woman. The woman has spoken. She will not go. You see her. She is not a prisoner. She is his. The word was heavy with distaste, but it was an admission. That is not the law, Kane spat. It is our law, Stans Tall replied. But we do not want this fight. You have come far. You have lost nothing. Yet, you will leave. I will not leave empty-handed, the marshal said, his pride on the line. Stans Tall nodded, as if he expected this. No, you will not. You will take supplies. We have dried meat. We have 5 good ponies. You will take them as a trade for the peace. You will ride out, and you will tell your commanders that the girl is dead, that she was lost in the storm, that you found nothing. Marshal Kane was in a trap. He was outnumbered. His victim was refusing to be rescued, and he was just being offered a way out that saved his life, if not his pride. He looked at Lottie. He looked at her hard. He saw the strength in her. He saw the bone beads. He saw that she was not confused. She had chosen. His face twisted in a sneer of pure disgust. It was the disgust of a man for something he could not understand. You'd rather stay here, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. With him, like an animal, a squaw? He is a better man than anyone in your town, Lottie said, her voice quiet. The marshal's face flushed red.
You are lost, ma'am, truly lost. You are a disgrace to your color.
He looked at Stan's Tall. Fine, we'll take the ponies. And the meat. But you mark my words. All of you. This land ain't yours. Not anymore. The tide is coming, and it will wash all of this away. He lowered his rifle. Sato, his eyes never leaving the marshal, slowly lowered his... The trade was made, stiff and silent. The Comanche brought the horses laden with bundles of dried buffalo meat. The soldiers dismounted, checked the supplies, and mounted the fresh ponies. They did not speak. Marshal Kane looked at Lottie one last time. "May God have mercy on your soul, ma'am," he said. It sounded like a curse. They turned. They rode out of the pass. They did not look back. Lottie stood, shaking, until the last sound of their hooves was gone. The tension broke. The warriors on the ridge melted away. Stan's Tall looked at Sato. "You have your life," the elders said, "and you have your woman. But the marshal spoke true. The tide is coming. You must go. Go north. Do not bring this trouble back to our fires." He turned and walked back to his lodge, leaving them alone. That night, they sat outside their new lodge. The stars were brilliant, a cold, sharp scattering of diamonds on black velvet. They had packed everything they owned, the furs, the pots, the weapons, the dried meat, was bound and ready, loaded on their two best horses. They would leave before dawn. They had not spoken since the soldiers left. The confrontation, the choice, had taken all their words. Lottie sat, leaning against Sato's good shoulder. He was staring at the stars, his face calm. He had faced death again, and won. She was thinking, not about the marshal, not about Trinity Wells. She was thinking about a new, quiet truth, a small change, a sickness in the mornings she had blamed on the bitter roots, a new tenderness in her body. She had been sold at 15. She had been used, broken, and discarded. She had been told she was worthless. She took his hand, the one with the T brand, the one that had held the rifle to protect her. She guided it, placing his rough, warm palm flat on her lower belly. It was still flat, still the belly of a thin, scarred woman. But she knew. He looked at her, questioning. "I think," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost in the sound of the creek. "I think we made something new." Sato froze. His hand was motionless. He did not understand. He looked from his hand, to her belly, to her face. She met his gaze, her eyes shining in the starlight. She was not afraid. She was not ashamed. The understanding dawned on him. His breath caught. His people were dying. They were being hunted, herded, erased. The soldiers, the ranchers, the tide was washing them away. He was a man with no tribe, a traitor, a lone warrior. He had expected to die alone, leaving nothing behind but the scars on his back. And now, this. A life, a new life, made in the lodge, in the storm, from two broken pieces. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and a slow, rare smile spread across his face. It was not a grin. It was a painful, beautiful unfolding. It was the smile of a man who had forgotten how. A smile that reached his dark, haunted eyes and lit them from within. He kept his hand on her, feeling the impossible promise. "Then we'll raise them free," he said. They left before the first light, when the sky was still a deep, bruised purple. The camp was asleep. No one watched them go. They rode out of the pass, the one Sato had defended, and turned their horses north. They did not look back. They rode through the high, broken lands, toward the distant line of mountains that scraped the sky. The air was thin and cold. They rode through wild lands, with no promises, no maps, and no one to rely on but the ones they made to each other, the ones tied in leather and sealed in blood. The final image was not of a broken toy. It was of Lottie. She was wrapped in the thick buffalo fur Sato had cut from his own back, the one that had saved her from the storm. The wind was sharp. But she did not flinch. Her face was turned toward the unknown, her eyes clear, her hands calloused and strong, holding her reins. Beside her, his rifle in its scabbard, his shoulders straight, rode the man who would rather face a legion of soldiers than ever let her be broken again. They rode on, together, into the north. Thank you for listening to this story. I would be obliged if you would comment with where in the world you are listening from. Please subscribe to From Wild West, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, in English.